today are here. My name, as Blair said, is Amanda Modell. And today this webinar is going to cover universal design for learning, which is basically a conceptual model that allows you to design classes and lessons and also to modify existing classes and lessons to meet accessibility needs for a broad range of students. I know that the advertising for this session mentioned diversity and inclusion in education in general. That, of course, is an extraordinarily broad topic. So universal design is one aspect that is an acceptable amount of information for a 1-hour webinar. But if you're interested in more resources on diversity and inclusion in education in general, then contact me offline and I'd be happy to send you more resources. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and dive in. Today, my objectives for this workshop is that at the end of the hour, you will be able to understand universal design for learning principles and have the tools to apply those principles in your classes. So to start off, what is universal design for learning? Universal design for learning arose out of universal design, which was a conceptual model in architecture and design. And essentially, we have a quote here on the slide that says, "Consider the needs of the broadest possible range of users from the beginning." And that's credited to Ronald Mace, who is an architect and the founder of Universal Design. And the idea was that the broadest possible range of users should be considered from the initial planning stages, so that any space, environment, building, or product could be used by the broadest possible range of users with different sizes, abilities, and different needs. And so here we see pictured on the slide, there's a picture of the interior of a building that features stairs as well as a ramp. And it's important to note, to understand universal design, that the ramp is integrated into the building. It's not tacked on after the fact. So while that is a very core element of universal design in architecture, the tools you're going to learn today can also be applied to existing courses and lessons. And then moving forward, you'll have them in hand to consider accessibility needs from the ground up, from the initial design process of a course. So I'd like to invite you all to take a moment and consider, as I said on this slide, there is a ramp and also stairs in the interior of this building. So I'd like to ask you to consider the question, who else could benefit from a ramp in a building like this? In the photo, there's a picture of a person with a bicycle, wheeling the bicycle up the ramp, but who else do you think might benefit from having this ramp? And you can enter your answers in the comments, and since there are only a few of us, no need to set it to private so we can all see the answers. Okay, yes, I see parents with strollers, someone with a stroller, or a mobility device. Absolutely. I can add to that maybe somebody on crutches, people with injuries, absolutely, or even somebody with a skateboard, right? There are a lot of people who could benefit from this ramp. And so similar to that concept, in universal design, as it transitioned into universal design for learning, not just students with disabilities benefit from these tools and methods, all the students in a class can actually benefit from universal design for learning principles. Okay, so now I'm going to transition from talking about universal design in architecture to universal design for learning in education. And what this slide shows is a conceptual model with 3 different rows. And the first row is representation, or how students get the information or the content of a course. And it's important in universal design for learning to present information and content in a variety of different ways. The second line of this model says action and expression. And that often takes the form of student assessments. And it's how students can show what they've learned or ask their questions. And it's important in Universal Design for Learning that we differentiate the ways that students can express what they know. And then finally, on this model, we have engagement. And that's how students get engaged and stay motivated. And this is a perennial concern for all educators. And so in Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, it's stressed that you can stimulate interest and motivation for learning and do that also in a variety of ways. Okay, so I'd like to dig in a little bit more to representation to start off. And this is how you give students the information, or presenting information and content in different ways. And earlier, when I described the picture that was featured on the slide, the picture of the video of, of the building with the ramp and the stairs, that was an example of presenting information, representing the information in multiple ways. You got a visual and you also got an oral description of that visual. So that's one example, but basically the idea of giving multiple modes of representation to students is that they're able to access information orally, visually, and in some cases you can institute modes where students can engage with content by touch or malleable haptic kind of models, 3D models, blocks, that sorts of thing. So this is one kind of classic and relatively simple example for multiple modes of presentation, and that's captioning. Anytime you show a video in a class, it can be captioned so that there is a textual representation of the information that's being presented orally or verbally. And what this slide shows is a still from a mini lecture from an online course where a lecturer has captioned what he's saying at the bottom of the screen. And that can benefit, of course, learners who have deafness or hearing impairment. It also benefits English language learners to have oral information represented textually. And really, everyone in the class then gets the information reinforced by being able to have it presented in multiple modes, in that textual and that oral mode. And then in the case of a video like this, you also have a picture, and so you have a third mode of presentation. So in addition to captioning videos, what you can do, you can describe the visuals as I demonstrated earlier, and it's important to do this with figures, graphs, any kind of visual information that you put onto a PowerPoint or in front of a class. It's important to offer a description of that. And a nice technique you can use in class is to ask a student to describe it, because that way you're actually encouraging more engagement from the class, and you can also check for comprehension that way, so it can be kind of a mini assessment. In addition to that, using multiple examples to demonstrate concepts is an important way to have multiple modes of presentation to your students. Having multiple examples can facilitate transfer of learning or transfer of knowledge, where knowledge is applied in new contexts. And also, if you use diverse examples, students with diverse cultural backgrounds are more likely to have something that they can relate to. And once again, this benefits all students in the class, because then they have the concept reinforced, and they can engage with it in multiple different ways. A couple other notes on multiple modes of presentation include always facing the class when you're speaking to them. So when an instructor is writing on the board, sometimes it's a habit to save time that they'll be talking about what they're doing while they're writing. And you can use a document camera or turn around to face the class. And this allows students who have a sign language interpreter or students who are reading lips to be able to access what you're saying about the work that you're doing on the board. In addition to that, when engaging with PowerPoints or visuals, you want to avoid saying, as you can see here, and instead insert a description of what it is you're referencing, or again, ask a student ask a student to provide that description. Similarly, if you have a lot of board work or a lot of work on a document cam, you want to avoid saying up here and pointing or down here, and instead explicitly referencing what you're pointing to. So those are all different ways to present information or to allow your students access to information in multiple modes that can make it more accessible to all of your students. I'd like to invite you to engage with the material a little bit here. And there are directions on the slide, and what they say is they ask you to think about a class you have taken or taught. And to engage with this activity, I'll invite you to think to yourself, do some free writing, or maybe sketch out a quick mind map about the following questions. How were multiple modes of presentation present in the course that you're thinking of? And how could the course be modified to incorporate multiple modes? So again, you can think to yourself, free write, or draw a mind map about these questions. And I'll give you a few minutes to kind of work on your own in the way that appeals to you. Oh, sorry. And then I'll give you a couple of minutes to work on your own in the mode that appeals to you, and then I'll invite you to share what you come up with in the chat.
Amanda, could you please go back one slide for a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back to the other slide now. Thank you.
Okay, sure thing. Okay, let's take another 30 seconds or so to finish up your thoughts. And then as you're ready, you can go ahead and enter them into the group chat. Or actually, do people need more time? No? Good? Okay. Okay, I've got the first, oh, good. I've got a couple of responses coming through. Okay, well, we've got a couple of responses here. Flipping a class allows a student to watch and rewatch videos with captions of instructor demonstrating how to solve problems. That's terrific. And then the student has the video later as a review. Class time is a collaborative group session in which student groups can solve, check, and defend answers. These sound like terrific, terrific options. And also disability studies conferences. Here, printed versions of all slides have been made available. That's a very important thing to do for accessibility, particularly large font, or providing your materials in a digital format ahead of time, in a format that can be used with a screen reader and also can be modified. So providing materials to students, providing oral materials to students that can have the volume amplified, and then having documents provided to students that can have the font enlarged. Those are all ways to make them more accessible. And there's a handout that you'll get at the end of this session that has more information and links on how to do all that. So that is terrific. Yes, using larger print on worksheets. Again, these are all great options. Okay, so we'll move on now. We're going to transition to talking about action and expression. This is the second row of the UDL, or Universal Design for Learning model. And it often takes the form of assessments, right? How can students communicate to us what they've learned? How can they ask for more information? Providing multiple modes of action and expression is really critical here for a number of reasons. And one classic example that's relatively simple that I have pictured on the slide here is having an online discussion forum, right? Students, for a variety of reasons, may have different amounts of experience or comfort with participating verbally in class. So having an option for them to compose their participation and then proofread it in a discussion forum allows for a wider access of action and expression for students to communicate what they know. And like I said, this is a relatively simple thing you can do, but it makes things more accessible for English language learners, for students with various psychological conditions that may make participating verbally more challenging. It also gives you a record, you and potentially TAs, a record to review to see how students are understanding the key course concepts. Okay, some more options for providing multiple modes of action and expression. And some of these do overlap, but using physical manipulatives like models, 3D models, or base 10 blocks that students can engage with. It allows students, again, one more mode of expressing what they know. Using interactive web tools like discussion forums, social media. There are also online discussion blogs and annotation tools that you can use. And once again, there's more information in the handout about resources that you can access for that. Also, providing examples of multiple ways to solve problems, right? Now, this can sometimes get overlooked, but we all know that in most of the work that we do, there's more than one way to get from point A to point B, right? And so providing examples of multiple ways to solve the same problem, those can allow students who process in different ways options of where to go. They also increase kind of learner autonomy and choice, which we'll talk about a little bit more in motivation and engagement. In addition, using concept mapping tools, like I've given you the option to draw a mind map, and also I've given you in the last prompt we had, I gave you an option of 3 different ways to kind of express what you knew. Due to the limits of the format, it's all kind of typing into the chat at the end, but in a larger class, you could use concept mapping tools or allow students different ways to express what they've learned in different formats. And finally, excuse me, when we move to kind of the level of giving students the tools to become more self-directed learners, when we think about action and expression, there are a couple of things that you can build in to assessments and assignments that can kind of build those skills in your students. And those include embedding prompts to stop and think, right? And also giving space in classroom activities for students to do that. And this allows students who may cognitively process at different speeds or in different ways, kind of a wait time, right? It builds in kind of a moment to stop and think, and frankly, can also be kind of nice in the midst of a classroom flow for the instructor to get a chance to stop and think as well. And then finally, always prompting students to show your work, right? And I think that often is kind of common practice, but it's also important to think about that as an accessibility measure so that students can demonstrate what they do know or what they do know of the process, and that you can assess that as well.
We do have a question in the chat box, Amanda.
Oh, great. Thanks, Blair. Let's see. I'm going to read this out. This is another thing, what I'm about to demonstrate. If someone asks a question verbally, you always want to repeat it back to the class in case people haven't heard. That also gives you a chance to maybe paraphrase the student's question and make sure you understand. And it can also be nice because it gives you a moment to stop and think. So this question says, I went to an interesting workshop the other day wherein we used Lego to represent conceptual models. That's awesome. Super cool, but not fully accessible to all people. Exactly, not everyone can manipulate in a small motor way. What would giving multiple options at the same time look like? Is this the UDL way? Multiple modes at the same time? Oh, what a good question. Well, when I think about that, I think about a couple of different kinds of manipulative tools that you could provide, or if it was possible to get those concepts across by asking people to, say, draw or work with Legos. And I'd also love to hear from the group if other people have ideas about how an activity where you were using Legos as conceptual models, a way to make that more accessible or to give multiple modes.
I was kind of wondering if would be like telling someone where to put the Legos or how to build the Legos verbally. Does that count, or is that a different step?
Well, I would think of telling someone how to build the Legos, right? That's a verbal means of presentation, presenting the information, whereas the student actually building the Legos, that I would think of as action and expression, or them expressing what they know. So in that case, I guess you could have an option for students to describe the process or to actually do it.
Okay.
And I feel like that would be a way to have action, multiple modes of action and expression. And it might make for a cool group, it might make for cool structured group work if you had students approach the same process from those multiple modes, right? Where one was describing the process, one was actually doing it. Oh, and Robin says, use Legos to help define the differences between rocks and minerals. Cool. That sounds like a fun workshop. Okay, now for a quick activity, I'd like to ask you to compare. Think about two different classes you've taken or taught. And again, you can think to yourself, free write, or draw a mind map about this question. How did these classes feature different modes of action and expression? And so once again, think about two classes you've taken or taught. You can think to yourself, free write, or draw. And the question is, how did these classes feature different modes of action and expression? Okay, let's take about another 30 seconds or so. And then as you have, if you have answers that can be expressed in the chat box, then please feel free to do so. Okay, these are great. From Christina, I have one class where students defined how they wanted to learn, how to be assessed. That's awesome. We're going to talk about that more in engagement and motivation. And another where material and assessments were predetermined, as often happens year to year. Okay, that's a great comparison. Blair says lecture versus lab courses. Lecture generally had one, maybe two modes. Lab is much broader, yes, with 2+ modes available. Let's see. And then Andrea had the test-retest model where students complete a test alone, then the same test again in consultation. Yes. Giving students option for different kinds of assignments, term paper, artistic creation. Yeah, these are all terrific. Allowing students, again, some autonomy and choice in determining what kind of final project they'd like to complete, and also to work independently and work in a group. I've done universal design workshops before that were really abbreviated, and that was like the choice that we got. You can think about this on your own, or you can talk to your neighbor. And those kinds of choices are really nice to give people different options to express what they know. These are terrific. Okay, now finally, we're going to move on and transition to engagement, or how students get engaged and stay motivated. Now, this is a very broad kind of topic. And so with this whole model of universal design, I'm really just kind of scratching the surface in a 1-hour webinar and giving you all an introduction and, again, the tools to dig deeper on your own. But engagement, of course, is a really important concern for all instructors. And one kind of tip of the iceberg thing at the very beginning you can do is put a statement in your syllabus for students with disabilities or about disability accommodations. Now, a lot of institutions require us to put these kinds of syllabus statements into our syllabi. But I would argue that if you think of it as a pedagogical measure in addition to a legal obligation, then it's possible that you can learn and have more benefit for everyone in the class. And so on the screen here, I have a sample syllabus statement that's also going to be included in your handout that you can use just to let students know that if they need accommodations, that the Student Disability Center is a resource, and also to open that line of communication with you. And one note about inclusivity and syllabus statements, I also, in my syllabi, I include a statement for multilingual students. And that's basically a statement that, I'm happy to share this offline also. It's a statement that encourages students to use all of their languages in note-taking, in drafts, and in their work. And for work that's turned in, right, I'm only able to assess work that's turned in English. But it lets students know that their multiple languages are valued, and that there's space opened up for them to use those skills, right, to aid their learning. And so those kind of syllabi statements, those are examples of initial ways to start to create a welcoming and supportive classroom climate, right? Now that, of course, could be the topic of its own workshop or series of workshops, but it's really the first step to engaging your students and motivating them. And from a UDL perspective, the kind of core concept in engagement and motivation is to optimize student autonomy and choice, right? And we got some of these ideas already in the chat, which is terrific. In terms of project design, what type of assessment they're going to have, if they're going to write a paper or take a test or turn in a project, these kinds of things. Also choosing their own topics, right? Choosing their own topic for a project can be something that's relatively simple and can skyrocket motivation. And this is something that we've seen in the research. Really clearly, right? That if a student has a topic that is relevant to them and they've had some choice in making that their topic, then they're much more likely to be engaged. And you can also, depending on how much latitude you have in your course or in the course that you're working in, even something as simple as allowing students to try to format a project slightly differently, use different colors or layouts, even something as simple as that can increase a student's feeling of autonomy and choice in the process. Also working with students, encouraging them to set their own personal academic goals. That's a really important way to maximize engagement and motivation. And while the learning goals of the course may not be open to being individualized, personal academic goals and also kind of knowing why your students are there can really help to intrinsically motivate a student with their own goals. And a kind of extension activity you can do with those, if you do choose to work with students or encourage them to generate their own academic goals, is to break those goals down into smaller objectives. Because that way they have kind of a stepwise motion they can make towards a larger goal. And that can also, it can keep things more feasible and also keep them on track and motivated. And finally, student autonomy in self-reflection and self-assessment. Those are two really important skills that help students stay motivated and engaged, in that they are encouraged to reflect on why this is important for them, for their personal and academic needs. And I would love to hear more in the chat section about specific strategies people have used to encourage self-reflection and self-assessment in their students. And finally, maximizing content relevance. This is again an area that kind of overlaps with things we've already talked about in terms of using multiple kinds of examples. You're more likely to find something that's relevant to your students. Also, is there something about the content that is socially relevant? You know, is this something that has appeared in the news or is a relevant social issue at the time? On campus, in the local area. And finally, assignment authenticity, right? Is there a way to create a situation in which the assignment feels authentic to students in terms of having a clear purpose and even having a clear audience? So once again, this is a kind of a broad overview of a lot of UDL strategies for motivation and engagement, but they kind of point to a central concept of universal design for learning, which is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? The term universal is a bit misleading in that it's really about having flexible and adaptable routes for your students to move through your course. Oh, Blair just shared the idea of exam wrappers in Future Class for Self-Reflection. That's a terrific idea. And one that's relatively simple to implement, to encourage students to think about how they studied, how they scored, and what they would change for next time in an exam wrapper. Terrific idea. Okay, so our final, one of our final activities for today is to create. I'd like to invite you to once again think to yourself, free write, or draw about the following questions. The first one is, how could you build in more autonomy for your students in developing their goals, activities, or assessments? And the second question is, how could you make course content more relevant to your students? So I'll give you a couple, and if you're not teaching right now, then imagine a time when you were teaching, and this might be more relevant to you. So once again, I'll give you a few minutes to work on your own, and then if it works for you to enter your answers into the chat box, please do. Okay, I'm getting a couple of responses. So folks, as you're wrapping up your thoughts, please feel free to go ahead and send your responses through the chat. Let's see. We introduced a half semester project in our upper year lab course and wrapped the first half semester activities to prepare students for their projects. Okay. And Blair says, reflecting on a previous class, I can build in more autonomy by scaffolding my assessments more. For example, when their final project is to do a research paper, I should have them started at the beginning of the semester and work on sections at a time with feedback from myself throughout. Peer evaluation and feedback at one or more multiple points too. That is terrific. And that's also a place where you can you can give students kind of project management tools. And that's another way to make large assignments more accessible for folks with different kinds of cognitive processing and psychological abilities. And so I think staged assignments, that's a terrific idea. Oh, great. Okay. And then making course content more relevant by finding out what interests the students and letting them tailor the output to specific scenarios. Same assessed criteria, but application may vary. Yeah, that's terrific. So it's a different context in which to apply the same ideas, right? And also allowing some autonomy and choosing that context is a terrific idea. Okay, that's great. Now, let's see if I can find my cursor here. I'm going to send you all a link to a Google Doc that you should be able to access. This is the handout for the workshop, and it's titled as 10 things you can do to make your classes more accessible. And there are more links and resources for the kind of nitty-gritty things that we've touched on in this workshop. And let's see. So if you can access this in these last minutes we have here, I'd like to invite you to kind of think through how you can apply some of the things we've talked about in your own classes. Skim through this Google Doc and write down or jot down 3 things you think that you could potentially implement in your own classes. And I don't want to limit it to the 10 things in this Google Doc, because there have also been a ton of terrific suggestions in the chat. So I'll give you a few minutes to look through that, and then we can come back to talk a little bit more. Okay, I'm getting a couple of comments, which probably means that people have gotten a chance to skim through. Describing the visuals, great. Um, accessible digital copies ahead of time. Yeah, that's a good one. Um, and if you're concerned about, because I know sometimes that people are concerned about attendance if they provide materials ahead of time, you can also invite your students to let you know their accessibility needs, whether or not it's a registered disability. And so you might have a group of students that choose to get those ahead of time, making it available to the whole class, but on request. Blair says, I'm cringing thinking of all the times I've said, as you can see here. Oh yeah, that's a thing, right? That's a thing we say. And I know, yeah, even just being nearsighted, I'm like, sometimes I can't. Okay, well, there are a lot of links at the end of your handout for further resources to dig down into this. CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology, is the center that has the most extensive guidelines for universal design, and you can find tons of examples and resources there, and really nice representation of the model and how to think through all of these elements. And there are also some really practical links at the bottom there, such as a simulation of what it's like to navigate a website with a screen reader, which is helpful to think through the needs of visually impaired students. And also even just something as simple as there's a font called Dyslexie that's actually been designed to be more readable for students with dyslexia. So you can download that from a link on the handout as well. Let's see. Oh, and I'm getting a comment from Christina. In the online environment, I still have office hours that I call Open Door. Instructors can have a separate Skype account that they share with students. I like that. If students see that their instructors are active, then they know they can contact their instructor. Really promotes accessibility. Oh, I like that a lot. That's a really nice kind of immediacy measure too, to really communicate to your students that that you're accessible. And let's see. Oh, Blair says, I have a question. What types of resources do disability centers typically provide? Terrific question. I know I can say at UC Davis, they will caption things because there are increasing captioning services available, but voice recognition is still really spotty if it's automated. And so like you've probably noticed if you've used YouTube captioning, it's very unreliable. But yeah, I think it's 5 business days in advance at UC Davis, the Disability Center will caption your videos. They coordinate if students need sign language interpreters, if they need note takers, some students, because of their cognitive processing abilities, employ students to take notes for them. They also coordinate longer extended time for tests. And so some institutions, they actually have space to do that. I think that's really important to provide space for students that need extended time on exams. So those are a few things that I know that the Disability Center at UC Davis does for instructors. And they're also, I think they can also work in consulting roles. And so contacting the Disability Services Center could also be a great place to dig down for more information or further questions that you have about specific situations. Yeah, I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions or anything else to add? Okay. Well, feel free. Let's see. You mentioned you could share some inclusion and diversity resources. Yes, I'd be happy. I'd be happy to send out some kind of education development, inclusion and diversity resources that I've used in the past. So I bet. Blair, will we have a record of everybody who participated here, and I could send out a follow-up email?
I just see I don't know the email addresses, so I would send her your address.
Yes.
So that way I can get it to you. And depending on what type of resources you want, I recommend the KU CTE website. They have I just put it on there, they have a whole slew of things on making your class more inclusive and diverse. So check that one out.
Yeah, that's terrific. And you can send me your, email address or put it in the chat, and I'd be happy to follow up with an email with more links and resources. So thanks a lot, everybody. Our objectives today were that you would understand the Universal Design for Learning principles and then have the tools to apply them in your own classes. So I hope we've met that. And Christina, I'll shoot you an email right after this. And thanks a lot, everybody. Hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Amanda. How about this?
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Amanda, it will actually like download the chat box too. So copy the email, but it'll download the chat box too, so you can see the questions that people had or suggestions.
Okay, terrific.
So I'll make sure you get that. Copy that though. We had good participation from Queens.
Yeah, right?
Okay, I copied those two just in case.
Okay.
There we go.
Awesome. Thanks,
Well,
Blair.
thank you so much. This was great.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I hope it went well. I did not have my notes. I was like, oh no, I'm having to freeze. I'm like totally improvising.